So, Integrated Pest Management for Fruit Trees. This is our bonus webinar number 1 with Stacey Hickman of Natural Insect Control. So, what's our goal today, everybody? Our goal is to get more comfortable identifying fruit tree pests and beneficials so that we can then research them further using our chosen IPM resource. Our IPM resource will then help us to develop a strategy to control or reduce that pest. So I know for myself that in the beginning, when you're looking at insects, there are such a wide variety of insects out there in the world. And how do you determine what is the pest or what is the beneficial that is on your tree? And I want to reduce the fear for all of us. Stacey, can you tell us how extensive is the world of insects and teeny tiny creatures in this world? Are there billions of different types? Are there millions? Are there a lot of insects out there?
There is a ton of insects out there. There is probably billions of insects, and we have probably just done the tip of the iceberg in being able to identify them. There is probably every year thousands of insects that are newly identified. So there is a lot out there. What is really interesting is most of them, I would say 90% or more, are actually really beneficial. It is just a small, slim amount that are not beneficial. And those are the ones that cause us all those headaches and all those problems with our plants, with our trees.
Okay, so super. So 90% of the good guys, let's say 10% of the bad guys. And we are also specializing in fruit trees, and fruit trees attract a certain type of insect, and you see them over and over again often. So let's see what we're going to do today. We are going to do our welcome and introductions, which we are doing just now. And hopefully, if you're new and you've just come on the line, you will put in the chat box your first name and where you're from. We have one poll going, and we'll have another one a little bit later on. Now, housekeeping, this is a webinar, and it takes up a lot of energy on your computer. So if you've got things like Facebook open or any other apps, Dropbox, for instance, close those apps and it'll be a smoother experience for you. The webinar will take about an hour. When I said 1 hour only, I thought that this software conks out after an hour, but we have a little flexibility if it takes a little more than an hour. Now, we are going to go through the pictures that many of you sent in. Feel free in the chat box to ask questions as we go along. As Stacey answers, I will keep an eye on the questions. Now, there's a way when you fill in right in the chat box, you can choose whether it's chit chat or whether it's a question. If you remember, mark it a question, and then for sure I'll notice it. So we will do a little bit of pest ID from your pictures, and then we'll have some time for any final questions that you guys may have for Stacey. Hopefully that sounds good to you guys. Tell me in the chat box if that sounds good to you. And I'm just going to complete that poll. Ending the poll and checking the chat. We've got Ram from Belleville, Stephanie from Grey Highlands, Max from Prince Edward County, Jennifer from Virginia, and Donald from Ontario. Okay, great. And Julie from Wyerton. Okay, so let's go back and start looking at some groovy pictures. So what do we got? First of all, guys, here's a quiz for you, and these are your pictures that you submitted. Right now, I want you to say on Pest ID quiz, sorry, that's weird. I want you to say if you recognize either of these pictures. So if you say, what do you see on the left and what do you see on the right? In the chat box, please identify what you see in these pictures. It takes a minute. Okay, and then we will talk about them further, but I just want to know if you were paying attention in the course. All right. And let's see if we've got anybody who chatted in here. Okay, it takes a minute. Okay, so try and put an answer to those questions. Back to my slideshow. Okay, so first of all, Donald sent in this picture. So, Stacey, tell me, how did you deduce that this might be plum curculio?
It's the damage that's on the forming fruit. It has that little sort of crescent-shaped damage that's on there that is a telltale sign that it is plum curcurio, which is a really common pest for all kinds of fruit trees. It does a lot of damage. There isn't a ton of controls for it, so being aware that you have that pest in your orchard is probably the best thing you can do. You can do lots of things by hand picking them off, maybe an option for you. But yeah, it looks like plum curcurio damage.
Yeah, that's what this, so that I circled just now, that sort of half moon, but it's interesting because not all of the holes are half moon shaped. So does that mean that there's another insect as well, or is plum curculio flexible in how it makes its oviposition scars?
Yeah, it actually might have something else going on in there. The initial larger part is what I sort of thought was plum curcurio.
Exactly. And it just goes to show sometimes when a tree is like weak or vulnerable, everybody goes at it. It's like, whoa, free for all. This tree is weak. Let's go for it. Let's take advantage of it. So I'm just checking to see if anybody got it right. Okay, so Donald had said plum. Good for you, Donald. Donald said plum curculio. Oh, except he knew in advance. Julie says, will you be talking about using trap trees for plum curculio today? Have you ever heard of that, Stacey? Trap trees?
I haven't heard of using trap trees. There was a few years ago a lure that was developed in the US for plum curcurio. I think it was one of the universities, I want to say Iowa State, but I might have that wrong, that was developed. It hasn't really made it to the commercial market yet, but there is some sort of lure for that particular pest out there. Hopefully that will make it to commercialization soon.
Okay, great. That's good to know. We're having fun with our lures because lots of us are starting to play around with traps. So thank you for that question, Julie. Now, Julie also knew that the second picture is the gypsy moth. Ram said caterpillar on the right, no idea on the left. Oviposition damage, Julie said on the left. And Donald knew that it was plum curculio. So let's go to the next slide. So here was Jennifer had submitted this picture. So Stacey, how did you know that this might be a gypsy moth?
Really common pest. We're in the middle of a really bad gypsy moth season. It's usually a 7-year cycle, so this happens to be one of those years where the gypsy moth populations are really high. I'm seeing a lot of gypsy moths out there. The telltale sign was having those blue dots just behind the head and the little orange dots just below that is one of the signs for it. But like I said, super common pest, feeds on a wide variety of hardwoods, and there's lots of controls for this one. So you can trap the male moths, you can use BTK on the caterpillars, you can do banding programs because those caterpillars come off your trees to go into bands to basically get rid of the heat of the day. So there's lots of things you can do for this one, but it's a really common pest for anybody that has trees.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, those guys are everywhere. Now I'm looking at it and sometimes you can see the colors of the spots a little better. This is a bit dark. But now looking at it, the bottom, where's the head? Is the head at the top with the two sort of things, or is the head at the bottom? Where's the head of that guy?
No, that if I remember correctly, when I looked at this photo, the head's at the top of this one.
Right. Okay. Okay. So that's great. So that was our gypsy moth. Now, quiz for you guys. What are these life cycle stages? We went through it in class, and hopefully most of you or some of you have gone through that part of the class. So you can say on the left is whatever, on the right is whatever. So have a look at that, and I'm going to just have a quick look at the chat to see if there's any other questions. Okay. So Julie says, Michael Phillips suggests using trap trees in his holistic orchard book for plum curculio. Julie, that's very interesting. I wonder if you know anything else about what those trap trees may be. Like, are they a specific type of tree? But that's very interesting. And once you get what you don't want is to attract plum curculio to your orchard to one tree, and then it finds all the others. So I'd love to know a little bit more about that. Ram says, what is the scale of that picture? I think Ram may be talking about the gypsy moth, maybe. How big is a gypsy moth? That
one was probably
2 inches. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, an inch or two. So hopefully that was answering your question, Ram. Leslie says on the right is a pupa. Tim says larva left, pupa right. Okay, so how do you feel about those answers, Stacey, before we go into more detail?
These guys are on the ball.
Okay, so let's have a look at each of the pictures. So, oh, John says right looks like a mantis cocoon, left looks like a larva. Okay, so let's go back to our slideshow, get some more details. So, now this is what Donald wrote. Are these eggs on a weed below an apple tree in the soil? And you said these look like a type of root aphid. So let's go into more detail. Are these eggs or are these larvae? What's going on here?
This is actually a species of aphids that's usually found below the soil, and that is actually the adult form. It's probably the females feeding on the roots. So it would be either a nymph or an adult. The adults, male forms them actually become winged, so they're never seen in the soil. It's a very common pest problem for lots of greenhouse crops. Usually causes a weakening in the plant, so the plant grows and it looks weak. It isn't got its beautiful green flush of leaves is some of the signs that you might have root aphids.
That's very interesting. So Donald found them on a weed below his apple tree, but it does look like roots. Hard to see. Maybe he pulled out the weed and maybe they're on the roots of the weed. Would that sound right?
Totally makes sense.
Okay. So if these are a type of root aphid, could they actually get into fruit trees or do they specialize more on weeds, certain types of weeds?
I would think you wouldn't have to worry so much about fruit trees, but definitely you want to clear away a lot of those weeds because you just don't want these guys in the orchard at all. So they probably feed just on plant material. That's where I see them most often. Haven't ever seen them on any nursery stock, so any trees at all.
Okay. So that's great. Good. So, and now here's Donald's picture. So he writes, this is a cocoon on the trunk of a tree or on the stake holding the young tree up. And Stacey, you said this is a hatched praying mantis egg case, super awesome predator to have in an orchard. How big would this case be, Stacey?
You're probably looking at maybe about an inch in length, and it is what the egg case a female leaves when she overwinters. This one looks like it's hatched just because it's got that large sort of tear inside of it, which could be rodent damage, but also looks like potentially it has been hatched already. These guys are an awesome predator. Praying mantis feed on whatever they can catch. They start off small, so they feed on small pests. They work up to the size of a grasshopper or a cricket when they're an adult.
Is it possible, could they ever start feeding on beneficial insects as well?
It's always a risk. They tend not to just because beneficial insects in general are way faster than praying mantis. So there is always a possibility they can feed on whatever they can catch. So there is a chance they could feed on something that is good.
But mostly we're hoping they're going to go for the bad guys.
Yeah,
Okay.
bad guys are slow and easy to get.
Oh, are they? Well, that's interesting. That's a very interesting thing. Like I find with things like Japanese beetles, they do seem kind of slow. They're pretty easy to catch and drown. Okay, here's a picture from Donald again. He writes, two red and black insects on top of each other mating, ? Plus smaller black insects on them and the leaves. Stacey, you said these look like fireflies. It is kind of hard to tell, but tell me what you see in this picture.
That was my best guess just by the markings on those insects. They did look like a species of fireflies. It's pretty common to see them in the spring, and mating is kind of what they do at this time of the year.
And the little black dots, Donald thinks they're insects as well?
It's difficult to tell. They kind of look like aphids to me, but again, I couldn't get a really good close-up of those ones.
Do fireflies eat aphids?
No, as far as I know, they don't.
Okay, they don't. Okay, guys, I'm going to check the chat box in a minute. But in the meantime, here's your question that I want you guys to answer or guess or whatever. What are these insects in this trap? And one of you will know because you submitted those questions, but let's see what the others say. And let's hop down and look at some comments and questions. Okay. So Julie was talking about trap trees. Remember, she mentioned trap trees. And she said, trap trees for plum corculio are trees that they prefer plum, crabapple, cherry, etc. You basically leave one tree unpruned until the plum corculio emerge. Then you prune your trap trees during that time to attract the corculio to those trees. Place a tarp under the tree, shake the tree, the bugs fall onto the tarp. If you have chickens, you can feed them with the bugs or dispose of the bugs. What do you think of that, Stacey? Kind of creative.
It is super creative, and using trap plants, not quite trap trees, but using trap plants in the greenhouse industry has been widely accepted now. We use them a lot to siphon off pests from the crop we want to save and onto the trap plant. So it is a great concept to do. And if it works for plum corculio, where there really isn't a lot of controls, it's a great idea.
And also, recently I did a radio show and podcast, some of you guys may have heard, on cover crops. And my expert was talking about using cover crops as trap crops. Very interesting concept. So it seems like with the trap crop, there's some activity. You need to harvest the crop and take those bugs with it. Take it off the site, get rid of it. Is that usually what happens with trap crops, or do you ever just put them in to distract the bugs and just leave them to fly around the trap crop?
Most times you're going to want to get rid of the trap crop because it's going to be loaded with pests, and you always run the risk when you leave that in your crop that potentially they are going to go back to what you're trying to save. So getting rid of the trap plant or the trap crop is a great idea.
Okay, so perfect. That's awesome. Now, Donald talks about the weed that had the root aphids on it. He said, yes, he pulled out the weed. So that was on the roots of the weed. Good catch, Donald. And Donald says, yep, about 3 centimeters long. I wonder if he was talking about the size of the aphids. Not sure. So nobody's answering this question. Does that mean that you do not know what are these insects? Well, let's find out in the next slide. What are these insects? So Donald submitted these pictures. Now, I'm guessing Donald knew because you can see at the top of the big long picture that there is a lure in this trap. So he was probably looking specifically for something. And the question is this oblique-banded leaf roller? What do you think, Stacey?
If that is oblique-banded leaf roller lure in there, absolutely. Lures are very specific for certain pests, so that's what's going to be drawn to your trap, to your sticky card or to your sticky trap.
You know, it's interesting because when you and I were emailing back and forth earlier, I said to you, okay, Stacey, I have a small orchard. We've got like 18 trees. And in one part of the orchard, I have put up a codling moth trap with a codling moth lure. And then I'm going to be putting up my red sticky spherical balls, and I have an apple maggot lure. So if, like, even in the same tree, let's say I had these two traps side by side, both of them with lures, would they cancel each other out? Would that be a bad thing? Would you want to space them out far? Or would the codling moth not even notice the smell of the apple maggot lure?
You are absolutely correct. That codling moth wants nothing to do with the apple maggot lure, and the apple maggot wants nothing to do with the codling moth. They are very specific for certain insects, and that's why they work so well in monitoring a pest population.
Fabulous. Okay. So let's see. I'm just quickly checking in the chat here. Julie says, Plum corculio also loves alfalfa. Donald, do you have a lot of alfalfa? And when you harvest the alfalfa, the plum corculio could move onto your fruit trees. Donald, I hope you'll answer Julie's question. That's very interesting. And Donald says, yes, Devin, our son, has alfalfa in a field nearby as a cover crop and for nitrogen. Well, we got some information going between two of the students here. They can continue to research that. Good job, guys, and good call, Julie. Okay, back to our slides. What's coming up next? Rolf, thank you for submitting this picture. So this is Rolf saying, my grapevine has holes in the leaves. I have found lots of these little bluish black insects. At the moment, I just pick them off and I kill them. What are these and what else can I do? And Stacey, when you saw this picture, you said it looks like flea beetle damage. Tell me what you thought.
Yep, flea beetle damage, they do little bullet holes in leaves and they feed on a wide variety of different plants. That sort of sign of those little holes is what I was thinking when I saw this, that it might be flea beetle damage.
And so flea beetles, what do they attack? Like what kind of plants do they go for?
We mostly see them in gardens, but like I said, I have had a lot of customers that have seen them on a wide variety of plants. So most times we see them on things that are in the potato family. They do a lot of damage there. They do damage for plants like kale. Kale is actually one of their favorite things. But yeah, it's one of those really interesting beetles that can feed on a wide variety of things.
Huh. So I'm thinking that his strategy of picking them off is fabulous. I mean, you don't have to use chemicals and it works.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. You're probably getting rid of a ton of your pests just by literally picking them off before they lay any eggs.
It's we've got a tomatillo plant, a couple of tomatillo plants in our garden this year. We don't usually grow it, and they have gotten some sort of striped potato beetle, I think it's called. I can't remember what it's called. And so my husband goes out every day and picks off like 3 or 5 of these guys or the eggs, and he smushes them. And this is the advantage of being a small scale grower. You can do this. If you're growing your tomatillas in a big farm, you can't afford to go out and pick off every insect and pest. But when you're growing on a small scale, it's an awesome way to deal with things. Now let's see. Yeah. So Rolf had submitted this picture, and I'm wondering if that's because there's one of the bugs there. I'm not sure that I can see any more detail. Did you see this picture at the time, Stacey?
Yeah, it is a little bit difficult to tell from the photo, but that is generally the shape of a flea beetle.
Okay, well, there you go. So something to research, Rolf. As you go through the course and not sure where you are going to be developing your research skills. And for all your solutions, you will find in your IPM resource. So I think you, Rolf, are in Ontario as well. So you'll probably use the OMAFRA tools, which are great. As you guys know, if you've taken my course, I really like OMAFRA's tool. Okay, I'm going to check the chat in a minute. In the meantime, guys, a little quiz. What is in this tent here in this tree? Great picture to the person who sent it in. So what is this insect mass in there? Let's look at the chat and see what people are chatting about. Have I missed somebody's? Okay, so back to Donald and Julie's conversation. Oh, lots of stuff going on. Okay, so Donald was talking about the alfalfa field that is probably attracting plum querculio to his fruit trees. And he writes, can also put row cover on them in the field. What I wonder what he's saying is, if you're growing alfalfa next to fruit trees, if you use a row cover, can you stop those plum querculio from flying out to your trees, Stacey?
That's a really difficult one. It's a possibility that they'll stay just in the alfalfa, but yeah, I really don't know if the row cover would stop them. They'd probably find a way to get out once the alfalfa starts to die back a little bit. And that means that your fruit trees might be susceptible at that point.
Good question and suggestion. So guys, you'll do more research on this and you keep me posted because I'd love to know what you find out about this. So, Donald is, 2 people said, Donald and Leslie said tent caterpillar for this picture. Donald was saying he puts a row cover on kale, potatoes, etc. to stop flea beetles. That's what he was talking about. Oh, yeah.
And that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So you're stopping them from getting in. You're not covering up a crop saying, okay, flea beetles, stay there. Okay. So yes, your row covers for that. That's great. In terms of this question, Sarah Jade says, these are tent caterpillars. We used to call them weavers. And my dad could cut off the branch and burn them with a blowtorch. Ooh, barbecue, yum. That sounds great, Sarah Jade. Thank you for sharing that story. Wow, a blowtorch. Okay, back to our slides. Let's find out more about this. So Ram had submitted this picture and you said, Stacey, this is an Eastern tent caterpillar. How did you identify that?
It's literally the tent that it makes. It's one of the few species that does something like that. Really devastating caterpillar that can feed on, again, many different types of trees. They can defoliate relatively quickly. So measurements like cutting out that nest or using products like BTK on a cloudy day when the caterpillars are feeding is really important. There's even a trap and a lure that's been developed for this pest if you wanted to go down that road to maybe time your BTK sprays a little bit better. But yeah, this is a pretty bad pest and a pretty common one.
Now, when you see them in the tent, is this the perfect time to get them and blowtorch them or stomp on them or whatever? Because if they're in the tent, they're not all over the trees eating your
You
leaves.
got
Is
it.
that the case?
Yep, you're
But
absolutely
if
correct. The best time to get them is when they are in that tent. Usually on the sunniest part of the day is when they're hiding in the tent to stay cool. When it's overcast, they're usually out feeding. So definitely want to do that on a sunny day if you want to get them in the tent.
Oh, so they're in and out. I didn't realize that they go in and out. I thought in the tent they're demolishing all the leaves that are inside the tent. They're happy, and that eventually they will all break out and eat everything else. But I didn't realize they go in and out.
They do, they do.
They do. Okay, that's a tricky one. So if you see a tent like this in your tree today, you want to get it as soon as possible. Is there some point where they don't inhabit the tent anymore and they're out free, and then you're really going to have a lot more work to do?
It would be overcast when it is an overcast day, not very sunny. That's when they're going to be leaving the tent. And then at the end of their life cycle, when they become a moth again.
Right. And so when they become a moth, do they damage the trees as well, or is it only the caterpillar stage?
It's only the caterpillar stage.
Aha. Okay, interesting. Good. Let's see what's next. Okay, guys, quiz time. I'll have a look at some questions, and I'm going to put up another poll. Who is this guy? I want to see who knows who's this guy here or gal. And I am going to put up the second poll while you guys answer. I'm just curious, and I'm starting a poll now. How far have you gotten in the IPM for Fruit Trees course? So some of you may say you haven't started it yet. Some of you may say you're part of the way through, and some of you will have completed the course. So I want to know where you are in the course so far. And while you answer that, I'm going to check. So I asked, who is this guy or gal? Leslie says stink bug. Jennifer says stink bug. Donald says stink bug. Tim says squash bug. So while people answer the poll, let's go and find out. Okay, so this was another Julie picture. Julie and Donald, you guys sent in lots of amazing pictures. So you can see below we've got a stink bug. Now, Stacey, you said that you feel this is a brown marmorated stink bug. Tell me a little bit about how you identified that and what it is.
Well, it's basically its markings on it looks like a brown marmorated stink bug. That stink bug also happens to be moving into Ontario in the last couple of years, and it does a lot of damage for many different agricultural crops. It's actually a really bad insect to have. They have developed traps for them to be able to monitor the population and to trap some of them. But that's sort of what when I looked at it, that's what I originally thought it was going to be, was a brown marmorated stink bug.
I think so too. I'm looking at it now. You can see the little markings around the shield on the outside, and you can see the little lines on his little antennae. So yeah. So and then this is interesting. On the left, you've got this amazing looking, great picture, Julie. A predaceous fly. Tell me about that. What might that be?
This was a really difficult one to identify to any kind of species, only because I usually need to look at the wings on the flies to be able to do identification. It just reminded me of some of our hover flies, so I'm thinking that it's probably a fly that's feeding on some kind of pests in Julie's yard.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, Julie, great picture. Love that picture. It looks quite big, doesn't it, from that picture? But yeah, okay.
It sure does.
Yeah, super picture. Okay. Now, another interesting couple. These are fascinating. From Julie, on the left is a tortoiseshell scale, and below is some sort of beetle. Can you talk us through these, Stacey? And this tortoiseshell scale, I have never heard of it before.
Yeah, it's a really cute little insect, really sweet looking, I have to admit, in terms of bugs terms. I've started to see them in the last 3 years on people's plants. I assume that because it's a scale, it is doing some damage, but I don't see the damage as extensive. And it's just honestly, it's a really neat little bug to look at.
Now, it must be pretty tiny because the scales that you see on fruit trees look like little tiny, teeny little bumps. You can't even see. I've never seen antenna on them or anything. Is this a similar creature to the scale that you would see on fruit trees?
It's slightly bigger than
Hmm.
what traditionally people think of as scale. So it is larger in size, about double in size of what the traditional scale is that you're thinking of.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fascinating. And does it like the other scales have a hard shell to it? It's hard to tell in this picture.
They absolutely do have a hard shell on the outside of them.
Right. Fascinating. Okay. Julie, tell us what kind of plant you found that tortoiseshell scale on. That'd be interesting. So let's talk about the beetle below. Yeah, how did you identify that? It's hard to see from the picture again.
It is really difficult to identify. It looks like it has a hard shell on the outside of it, which is a characteristic of all the beetle family. They usually have a brightly colored hard shell. And that's sort of the line that I was thinking when I saw this photo.
Okay. Okay, great. I'll go back to chat in a minute. So I'm going to go back to chat in a minute. In the meantime, folks, I want you to answer this question. What is going on here? So what's going on in this picture? What do you see? If this was happening on your tree, what would you think? Let's go back to the chat and see who's got something to say here. Right. Going down a little bit. Okay, so in terms of the course, Jennifer says she hasn't started it yet. Well, Jennifer, you got lots of stuff, interesting stuff to learn and explore. Julie says, stink bug. I have had a really hard time distinguishing the difference between brown marmorated stink bugs and the bugs that they can be confused with. So can you give Julie some guidelines as to how you identify a brown marmorated stink bug?
Julie has some great questions. There is another beneficial insect that is the spine soldier bug. Almost looks identical to the brown marmorated stink bug, but spine soldier bugs has these two little spikes on the sides of it that stick out. So its shield goes across the top, and then it has these two little spikes. The stink bug doesn't have those spikes on it, so it's kind of got rounded shoulders. The spine soldier bug, an amazing predator to have in your yard, feeds on a wide variety of caterpillars. They're actually really a fantastic bug and really difficult to find. But once you've got a population, they seem to come back year after year. So that's the two that look very, very similar, but to do very different things.
So that's great homework for all of us because I know that the brown marmorated stink bug has traveled a lot. I know we have it here for sure. I have some in my chimney that comes to visit me in my home. They're brand new. They come down when it's nice when I light a fire in the fireplace, and then they'll crawl down and say hi. But let's all do a little research. Look at spine soldier bugs and brown marmorated stink bugs. Look at the pictures of both, and so that we can all distinguish between the two. Thank you for that question, Julie. John says, this is what destroyed my squash crop last year, and I wonder if he might be talking about the brown marmorated stink bugs. I'm not sure.
It's a possibility.
They would eat a squash crop, hey?
They eat a lot. They eat a lot of plants.
Yeah. Okay. So Julie says, I was thinking the picture on the left was a sawfly, but I had no idea. Not sure which picture we're talking about here, but
I think she's thinking about that one that was the fly.
Oh yes, she thought it was a sawfly. Okay, so could it be a sawfly?
It is a possibility. The sawflies that I've seen most times in people's gardens and in plantings are usually brightly colored. They do have that body shape, so it may be a sawfly, but like I said, most of the ones I've seen are really brightly colored.
Okay. Okay, great. More research we can do more research on that. That's a super question. Sarah Jade says, Do these come in green too? I saw a huge green one the other day on my June berries. Now, not sure which which bug we're talking about. Are there green stink bugs? Are there green? I'm not sure. Sarah Jade, maybe you can specify in a comment. Okay, Donald is talking about this woody picture here. Donald says it looks like borer damage on the wood. Yeah, I think so. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And before we continue on, Julie says, I can't remember what plant the tortoiseshell scale was found on. Haha. I think it was actually a house plant. But it was
That makes
nothing.
sense.
It does it? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. She said, but it was nothing I had ever seen before. And I thought it would be neat to contribute to our bug discussion. Julie, you are contributing fantastic things to our bug discussion. Thank you for that. Now, Sarah Jade specifying that she saw a stink bug that was green and bigger than the brown marmorated stink bug. Is that a possibility? Do stink bugs come in green?
Yeah, I would think you would find stink bugs in green. It is a large family of insects, so there is a very possibility that there is large green stink bugs out there.
Yeah, and aren't stink bugs often they're beneficial, right? There's only a
A
few
lot of them
nasty
are.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of
Okay.
them are. The brown marmorate's gotten a really bad rap in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, those guys are bad dudes. We don't like them. Okay, next. So we are looking, this is again Julie's picture. So Julie had wrote us an email and she said, look, there was a hole in the tree. This was an apricot tree, but the hole was 2 to 3 feet above the ground. And Julie was saying, well, wait a minute. If it's some sort of borer, wouldn't it get in lower down on the tree? Wouldn't it crawl out from the mulch or the soil and then crawl right into the tree? Is it possible that a borer would climb up 3 feet and then make its way into the tree?
I think so. I think there is a possibility. Like I was thinking, I had seen in the last little while people having trouble with birch bronze borer, which does a hole about that size and about that distance off the ground. Without seeing the insect or even the larva, it's really difficult for me to identify. The other ones that I thought it might have been is possibly lesser or greater peach tree borer, but again, those are usually at the soil level where you see the borehole just above it.
Now, what was cool about this one is, so Julie said, there was sawdust around the tree. So often people say, oh my gosh, there's sawdust around my tree. What is that? So again, a nice, interesting, not nice, but a sign that you've got some sort of borer damage, right? Like pretty much always when you got a borer, will they leave sawdust behind?
It is a telltale sign that there is a borer in there. The only other thing that I could think of is some sort of bee or wasp that maybe is using as an oviposition site, so trying to lay their egg in there. You would see sawdust in there, but you would also see the insect having activity around the borehole. And I don't know if Julie's had a chance to see anything like that.
Very interesting. Okay, more to research on that. Now, in terms of, you guys are in your orchard, in your garden, and you see damage like this. So one of the things you may investigate is this a borer? And again, using the tools we learn in the course, Integrated Pest Management for Fruit Trees, you're going to go research, okay, it's an apricot tree. I seem to have borer damage. What are the borers that are likely to be affecting my fruit tree, the apricot tree? So this is just great. You're learning the symptoms and signs, and you get to start to be your own private detective doing your research. And what an interesting idea that it could also be an oviposition scar or issue. So very interesting. Let us move on to the next slide. Now, we were talking about borers, and Donald had sent in this picture. Donald, we love your pictures too. And Stacey, you said this looks like a borer, and you mentioned this birch bronze borer, which people are seeing more of. You asked him, did you see any holes on the tree it was on? Now, again, Stacey, how it's a little blurry, but how would you have recognized this little thing as a borer, a birch bronze borer?
It's the body shape. Borer adults, those beetles that you see, are usually very elongated and long. And that was sort of what I was using to kind of go, I think this is some type of borer.
Okay, great. So that's on our borer theme. Now, Julie had sent this picture, which you said, okay, it must be some sort of beetle. Julie, I think you had commented that you thought, could this be a sawfly? Is that correct? I'm not sure. Stacey, what do you think when you look at this?
This one is a really tough one for me. I couldn't get in there well enough to distinguish any characteristics. All I could kind of do is I think that it's a beetle is the best I could do with this one. A couple things to watch for is to watch if there's any root damage, because beetle larvae tend to be in the soil, and to see if there's any damage by that insect feeding. Those might be signs to be able to figure out a little bit better what it is.
And actually, that's a really good point, because when we are taking pictures of these insects, like some of us may actually be trying to trap them and put them in little plastic containers so that we can kind of turn it around and look a little closer. This is a great argument for why really it's a great idea to have little plastic vials with you and just grab them. Trap the guy if you can, so you can look more carefully. But ideally in a picture, what would you need to see? Would you need to see the wings spread out? Would you need to see different angles of the insects?
The closer, the better for me. Being able to get in there and see some distinguishing characteristics is important. So top view, bottom view is fantastic.
Great. Okay. And so guys, I want to see pictures for the next webinar in July. See if you can catch some of these guys, put them in your little plastic vials, take a bunch of pictures. It's good practice for us, right? To be a little hands-on. But these pictures have been so fantastic. Okay. I'm going to check the chat in a minute, but here's your next question, guys. To you, do all trapped insects look the same? So, do all trapped insects look the same to you? I want to hear your answer to that question. Okay, let's look at some comments while you answer that question. Julie asks, does the brown marmorated stink bug go through an early life stage when it is green?
Not that I know of. I think its early stages are not brown, but like an orangey color. So I don't think it goes through its green stage.
Okay, great. So Julie writes as well, the last beetle picture you posted of mine indicated as a beetle was also the same bug that I found on the trunk of a peach tree.
Ooh.
And I was wondering if it was a type of boring beetle. I have another picture of this that is better. I can send it along. Julie, do send it along, and I can always forward it to Stacey. So could it be a boring beetle?
That would be fantastic, Julie, if you could do that. That'd be amazing. I'd love to take a look at that to see if I can get you a little bit closer.
Sounds great. Okay, so in terms of do all trapped insects look the same to you? Jennifer says, no, they do not look the same to me. Donald says, some distinguishing on size, wings, legs, etc. Okay, great. So we're looking, let's turn, I think we see this picture again in the next slide. Julie says, trapped insects don't look the same. I noticed I caught some beneficials, rove beetles on my sticky traps. Okay, let's just go to the next slide and we'll go into more detail. So this was a Julie picture, and I'm looking at this. Julia, tell us what this is. This looks like a top of a yogurt container covered with like tanglefoot or something. So do tell us what you did with this trap and what you were aiming for. But Stacey, when you look at this picture, what do you see? What is it telling you about where Julie put this up?
To me, I'm looking at it, I'm seeing some flies, I'm seeing some beetles in there. It is a good cross-section of what you would find in someone's garden.
Now, these flies and the big flies, the little flies, would you look at them and say these are pests, or would you say that they are fine, they're okay? Like,
it's difficult to say. I would probably say that majority of them are actually fine, not doing any damage to your plants. But it's difficult. I actually need to have the physical sticky card in front of me, which would help a lot to be able to identify exactly what's on this yogurt lid.
Now, if you did have the sticky card in front of you, would you be putting it under a microscope with like put some saran wrap or something on top of it? How would you then go deeper and figure this out?
We'd actually use an alcohol solution to take them out of the sticky material. And then, yeah, we definitely have to use a microscope to look for distinguishing characteristics.
Right. So was this a useful exercise for Julie to put up this little trap?
It's an amazing exercise. You get to see sort of what is in your own backyard, some of the wide variety of insects that we have just right outside our doors. So it's an amazing thing to do.
Okay, so that's one. Let's look at our next one. This one is Susan, me. This is my codling moth trap. I put up a codling moth trap, a diamond trap with the codling moth lure. And this is a picture I took only a few days later. And I'm seeing clearly there's some sort of moth in there. I don't know how well you can see it. So if you're looking at this, Stacey, what do you think? Is the trap working?
I would say that trap is working. Those look like codling moths to me in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting there. I did see, I think in the picture on the right, you can see there's a fly. I saw a poor little fly that landed there, and he was kind of in the death. He wasn't quite dead yet. He was looking around like, why am I stuck here? This is really not fun. I felt a little bad about that, but I guess that was an accident. So let's move on to our next picture. So my cherry tree, I believe I have an issue with cherry fruit flies. So I put up this yellow sticky. I'm trying to see what we got. So when you look at this trap, what do you see? Do you think that these might be cherry fruit flies? Do you see something else?
I do think that you might have some cherry fruit flies in there, and it looks like towards the bottom of the card that you might have some kind of beetle trapped on there, but it does look, when I saw the picture, that it might be cherry fruit fly.
And so the cherry fruit flies, they're quite small. Like how do you distinguish them just looking at the board?
Well, when I look at them, I'm looking at the size of them. I'm looking at what's in their wings. They have sort of banded wings for all the species that kind of run in that cherry fruit fly family or apple maggot family. That's the things that I am looking at.
Interesting. Okay. And for me, being new to using traps, it's like, wow, once they stick on there, how do you even know? Like they do start to decompose after a while too. So that's why I guess it's important to check them on a regular basis while they're still fresh. And use our hand lens and get a little bit closer without getting stuck to the actual card. So that's awesome. Let's move on to one more. And this is also me. And that was a white trap that I put up specifically to see if I could catch European apple sawfly. And you said you thought there might be some on there. And again, how would you distinguish, when you look at that trap, what do you think? And how would you distinguish what you see?
Towards the top of the trap, there is some larger flies, and sawflies tend to be, in terms of flies, a relatively large insect. So those, when I kind of looked at that card, that's what I was thinking.
Interesting. Okay, that's great. Cool. So now let's go on to our next. Oh, there's our close-up, and I'm not sure if you can see this on your phone, but it looks a little messy right now. Okay. Okay, next question for you guys. I'll go back to the chat, but who is this cutie? So that's the question. Who is this cutie? And if you know the answer, you can answer it. So let's go back to our chat. Jeff says, trapped insects don't all look the same to me, but I have trouble identifying specifically. Stacey, I guess that's common for all of us to
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's common for everybody and even myself.
So I guess it's also practice makes perfect. The more we know what we have in our orchard, the more we get confirmation. And plus, I'm feeling like doing the targeted traps with lures is really teaching me a lot because it's attracting that. I never knew what an adult codling moth looked like. I knew the damage, but I never really would have, if I saw a codling moth flying around, I wouldn't have said, hey, that's a codling moth. Now that I've started trapping them, I can, I know what they look like. So it's great learning. So, okay, Julie says, we asked her about her yogurt lid. She says, yes, it's a yogurt lid covered in tanglefoot, hung before bloom until after bloom in order to catch European apple sawflies. That is brilliant. And Julie, thank you for sharing that, because here's my question. I know that with European apple sawfly, it's recommended to put up your white trap before petal fall, but I'm terrified of killing my beneficials, and so I actually waited. How do you feel, Stacey, about putting any traps up during pollination time, during blossom time?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one because you definitely don't want to damage any of the pollinators that we have. It's such a delicate balance because you want them to do their job, but you still need to monitor for these pests. Um, Probably leaving it down until pollination has ended and then immediately putting up maybe the best course of action. Again, it's just to conserve the pollinators that we have out there.
That's my super conservative approach, and it's too bad because I don't think they have a specific lure yet for European apple sawfly, which is relatively new. Hopefully, one day they will. But yeah, so that's what I did. But Julie, I'm looking at your yogurt lid, and I don't see a lot of beneficials on there. So somehow that worked out for you. Donald says about this cutie picture here, some kind of ladybug. Julie says, by using lures to trap insects, could you potentially draw insects oh, great question. Okay, Julie says, by using lures to trap insects, could you potentially draw insects that you don't currently have into your orchard? So, what do you think?
It is a great question. We get this question oftentimes with Japanese beetle traps. The lures only work in a certain radius from the trap. So you're looking at maybe a couple of meters from the trap. So you're really just drawing from your immediate area. You're not drawing from kilometers away when you're using a pheromone lure and a trap.
Okay, that's good to know. That's comforting because, again, I wanted to put up my apple maggot lure with my spherical ball as a test. I'm not sure. I don't think we have apple maggot, but I wanted to test it. And I certainly don't want to attract an insect that we don't have yet. So that puts my mind at ease a little bit. Anthony says, I have heard recommendations to put lures beyond one's garden or orchard so that insects aren't lured into the garden or orchard. So that's an interesting theory, Anthony. So basically, put your lures in your neighbor's backyard. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great idea, but I'm wondering if it'll really give you a good snapshot of what's happening in your orchard, being if those traps are put too far away. You might be missing something that's happening in your orchard and is happening in your neighbor's orchard instead.
Yeah, and I think the sensitive point is the Japanese beetles. That's the one that seems that I have heard stories of people saying, I had a little problem with Japanese beetles, and then I put up the trap, and then I had a big problem with Japanese beetles. I haven't heard it with any other traps, but I don't know, if you have any other comments on that, Stacey. You did already mention that you even felt with Japanese beetles it wouldn't be a problem. But what do you think?
Not. Yeah, it is a big question with Japanese beetles because those traps do draw hundreds, if not thousands, of beetles to them. So it seems like you're siphoning everything from the neighborhood, but honestly, it is only going from a couple of meters from around where the trap is.
Huh. Okay. Couple more comments and then we'll go back to our little slideshow. So Julie says, surprisingly, I didn't find any bees on the sticky traps. However, I have caught one or two in the past. I also agree I hate to trap these beneficials, but my hope is that there are so many beneficials around, as I plant a variety of plants to attract them, that this trap is only up for a few weeks and it won't negatively influence their populations. I would prefer to use a lure if there are lures. So I think that's really, a very detached and healthy approach that you're taking, Julie. I find that over the years, I'm trying to be less emotional, whether it's having to cut down a fruit tree that's sick, or, you catch a bee, or recently in our orchard, we had some baby skunks. And
Mm.
one day they're so sweet. And one day I saw a fluff of skunk that had probably been run over by a lawnmower in the park. And it's just like, I'm trying to learn to be a little bit more detached. So I think, Julie, your attitude is a really good one. Anthony says, maybe put a trap lure to identify what's going on. Okay. Sorry, I'll read this again. Maybe put a trap lure to identify what is going on and then put lures farther away. So he's back to that conversation about, not sure what to say about this. Do you have any comments for Anthony?
I think it's a great idea. You'll know what's going on in your orchard and then potentially stopping anything that's coming in from the neighboring area before it reaches you. It's not a bad idea for trapping.
Okay, great. So we've got a few more slides left to go. And then, so you had identified that absolutely sweet little ladybug, the yellow and black one. You thought it was a 14-spot ladybird. And Julie also submitted this amazing weevil picture, green weevil. So let's first start with the ladybird.
Oh, that's a fabulous little bug. Ladybugs in general feed on like 400 different kinds of bugs in your garden. So it's awesome that Julie has this in her backyard. It's probably doing a ton of pest control for her for free. And it also gives us an idea that how diverse the ladybug population is. This looks very different from what the traditional ladybug most people are used to seeing, but it is still a beneficial insect, just like those red and black ones that we're used to seeing.
Okay, now she also sent in this picture of the weevil. Tell us about weevils and this green weevil.
This one, I think you got to be watchful of. Potentially, this could be a pest that is going to cause some problems for the plants that are in your garden. Weevils tend to feed on plant material, so this is definitely one to keep your eye on to see if you see any kind of damage that it might be doing.
Aha, interesting. Are weevils in general, they are damaging in general? Like I looked at and I don't know why, I don't know much about weevils, but I said, I think that's a weevil. Does it have like that little elephant trunk kind of thing? Is that the mouth part?
It totally does, and that's its distinguishing characteristic.
So yeah, so can there be beneficial weevils, or when you see a weevil, you're like, watch out for that guy?
I would always, when you see a weevil, I would tend to look at where he is and what plant he's on and really watch out to see if any damage happens.
Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide. This was an interesting one, and I've seen this before too. So Julie says, what is that frothy stuff? Is that eggs? She called it a saliva-like substance. What would that be?
So that totally is, it is eggs. It is from a spittle bug. So they basically lay their eggs in that frothy, moist, wet kind of egg case.
And spittle bugs, are they beneficials? Are they pests?
They are actually, I'm going to have to say they're probably neutral. They tend to be found on weeds, so they tend to be feeding on plants that we don't want. So in a sense, they're kind of one of those bugs that fall into that neutral thing. We are a pest, but we're eating something that you don't want in your garden.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Yeah. Now we know what it is. That's fantastic. So it's not like we really need to cut off and throw away those eggs. They're just coexisting with us. They're not good, not bad. Why kill them? You don't have to kill them. Okay, great. And Donald sent in this it's a little blurry, but what a great picture. What a great looking bug. So you thought this was a sawfly. I started Googling it. I'm like, which kind of sawfly? There is a poplar sawfly that's orange. So tell us about this, what you thought when you saw Donald's picture.
There's that brightly colored sawfly that I'm used to seeing. Immediately when I saw that, that's the first thing that came to mind, that this is some species of sawfly. It's that beautiful bright colors on there.
Yeah, like when you Google it though, and I love the little lines on his little orange legs. But when you Google it, I didn't see a lot online for brightly colored sawflies like this.
Oh, I've seen a lot in gardens. There's a rose sawfly that is incredibly brightly colored like this one.
Good. I want to look that one up. And it's interesting if it's a rose sawfly, that's the same family as apples. I wonder if a rose sawfly might attack apple trees.
There's a possibility.
So it's same family. So wow, great picture, Donald. Okay, Questions for Stacey. I'm going to look at the chat. You guys, our timing is fantastic for a nice little webinar. Okay. Before we go, I'm going to go back a slide. Julie says, can you tell us how you identified that weevil to its species from the photo? What are its identifying characteristics? So you remember that weevil? I can go back for a second and then I'll go to Ram's question next. So how did you identify the weevil?
I, again, look at that front part of that insect. It has that beautiful little snout, and that's a very characteristic of anything that's in the weevil family.
Yeah. And again, if Julie were to catch that weevil and put it in a little plastic vial so that you could look more closely, would you be able to identify it better or not necessarily? Like, are there just lots of weevils out there?
There is a lot of weevil species. It is a big family, but definitely the closer I can get to it is the better I can find for identification.
Okay, great. Now let's go back. I know that Ram had a question. Ram says, I found that white foam on the bottom of my rhubarbs. Inside, I found small, squishy green bugs. It really seemed to cause damage to my rhubarbs. Anyways, I removed it.
If it's causing damage, you're doing the best thing you can by removing it.
Yep. Okay, so then you're basically being interactive and seeing that it's damaging and then making your decision. Julie says, is that the only type of green weevil? And does its color remain green throughout the entire season?
There are definitely a lot of different species of green weevils. That one did look like an adult, so I'm going to think that it's going to keep that green color throughout the season.
Okay. And Jennifer says, can one attract beneficials to the orchard? So Jennifer, in Integrated Pest Management for Fruit Trees, we are talking lots and lots about attracting beneficials and all the tools that you got to use. But let's hear what Stacey says. What would you say are some of the best ways to attract beneficials to your orchard?
Definitely want to have some crop that has basically that is flowering throughout the season. So beneficial insects in general need a food source and a nectar source. So things like sunflowers are great to have in your orchard. They're going to draw a lot of beneficial insects. Asters, things like along those lines are going to draw a lot of beneficial insects. There is a lot of wildflower mixes that are great to have in there to be able to bring in the insects that are in your neighborhood and give them a place to lay their eggs, a place to feed, and basically pests for them to eat. So it's a great idea to try to draw them in.
Oh, yeah, we absolutely want them. That's for sure. Donald writes, if we mailed you an insect in a vial, what kind of expense for your identification services and recommendations for ecological control? Good question, Donald.
Yeah, basically just send it off to me. We tend not to charge for identification. Hopefully I can do it relatively quickly. Sometimes it takes me weeks to be able to do an identification, but hopefully I can do it relatively quickly and get some recommendations back to you.
And tell us about your company. I mean, you guys do have lots of traps. You have lots of other tools. Tell us what kind of tools you have to help people with insect pests.
Yeah, we definitely have lots of traps for monitoring, lots of different lures. Any pests that you potentially have, it's always good just to drop me an email and say, do you have a trap or a lure for this? And we're happy to look into things like that for people. We do offer things that are like general predators. So hopefully throughout the summer, we'll have ladybugs. We had praying mantises in the spring to give people general control for their yards. We also have very specific insects that can work for a wide variety of pests. Like if you've got aphids, we have a great little midge that will feed on all kinds of aphids species out there. So there's definitely lots of things that we can go down the avenue to help you.
Well, that's fantastic. So, and then Leslie asks, is there a really good book or website out there about building a pollinator beneficial garden? Great question, Leslie. Also, make sure that you make your way through the course because I go into a lot of detail in the course or some detail about farmscaping. And as you go through the course, you're going to understand that you want specific insects that will tackle the specific pests that you have. So you will carefully be customizing your own pollinator and beneficial garden. So I'm not sure if you got to that part in the course yet, but hopefully you will. But back to Stacey. And do you have a good book that you love on creating a pollinator garden?
There are lots of resources online. I don't have any book recommendations, unfortunately, but there's definitely lots of resources online to be able to find that information.
Great. Okay, so Tim asks, please indicate again the website. Can you tell us what is your website for more information about your company?
It's just our name, so it's naturalinsectcontrol.com.
Okay, so easy for people to find. Leslie says, I have reached that part. I was just wondering if there was a good resource. Okay, perfect, Leslie. So if you find one, I'll keep looking as well. Oh, Leslie, there is a resource, and I think I refer to it. What's her name? Jessica. It's something called Good Bugs, Bad Bugs. Jessica Walliser.
I have that one.
Jessica, I know Jessica from the Garden Writers Group. Honestly, Leslie, that is my favorite book on building a pollinator garden. I'm so glad you brought that up. And I think I put it in the notes for that lesson. Donald says, farmscaping was fascinating, generated a really good discussion with my son around cover crops and my wife regarding flowers. Planted Phacelia in the orchard this week. And I don't know what Phacelia is. Phacelia. Donald, I'm going to have to look that up. I'm very curious about it. Okay, guys, we are coming to an end of this webinar today. I'm going to end the poll. So the poll was basically saying 15% of you haven't started the course, 61% of you are partway through, and 23% of you have finished the course. I'm very proud of all of you because I know everybody's super busy at this time of year. Okay, so I want to say, and folks, you may want to say thank you to the wonderful Stacey for coming to join us today. I'm hoping that next time we will have different insects because the year will have continued on and there'll be different phases. I'm hoping people are going to be playing around with traps. But Stacey, what do you think we will see in July that's different?
I think you're going to find that your traps are going to be starting to fill up a lot more and that you're going to start seeing a lot more pests in there. I think you're going to see a lot more adult pests, both beetles and flies. So it'll be really interesting to see what photos are sent in for that July timing.
I can't wait. And thank you so much to all of you guys who sent in your photos. Next time, if you didn't send them in this time, I'm sure lots of you will send in more next time. A couple more comments before we wrap. Julie says, I have huge concerns around invasive species being planted as beneficials. Oh, for example, sweet Cicely. I would suggest before buying your plants, you be sure you are not planting invasive species. Native species are highly recommended as they are needed for our native insects, many of which are specialists. That's an interesting point. Thank you. So everybody is saying thank you here. Julie says, thank you so much for your insight. This was a great webinar. Tim says, thank you for the helpful information. Jennifer says, thank you, Stacey. This was so helpful. Jeff says, thanks. An interesting webinar, timely as well. Stephanie says, thank you very much. Very helpful. Jennifer, great webinar. Thanks to both of you. Rolf says, thank you. Oh my goodness, there's so many thank yous. Leslie says, thank you for the webinar. It was very interesting. Donald says, many thanks, Stacey. Good to see you in person. And Max says, very useful. So we are all sending you so much love and appreciation and gratitude for being with us today. And we can't wait to tune in again in July. So we look forward to it.
Thank you guys all so much. Thanks so much for sending you photos. You guys are amazing.
They are amazing, aren't they? I'm so proud of my students. They're awesome. Okay, guys, I'm going to turn off the webinar in a minute, and Stacey and I are saying goodbye. We will talk to you next month, and have a great month, everybody. Take care. Bye. Bye, Stacey. Thank you.
Thanks.